We are on week 3 of a series called Change Your World, 4-part series that we're going to be ending next week. Change Your World, and I think we are crazy enough around here to believe that every person has a world-changing message inside of them. We believe that wherever you go, wherever you live, whatever it is that you do during the week, that you have a world-changing message inside of you, and that your story and what God has done for you is salt and light in the world. That was week 1. Jesus said that you're salt and light. Salt and light makes things better everywhere it goes. I've never been a fan of the dark, and I've never been a fan of food that doesn't have a lot of salt on it. And so salt and light just makes things better, whatever application you put it in. And then last week we talked about the story of the Good Samaritan. And we read the whole story together, and we really looked at how that story was a setup. A lawyer was asking Jesus, the greatest commandments. And then, Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the greatest commandment. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so this lawyer asked a great question: who's my neighbor? Looking for a loophole. And so we're gonna look at that a little bit today. But I really wanted to come to you with this thought. It's in Proverbs 11, and I love the way that this is a paraphrased translation. And so this is the Message, which I feel like captures this verse, and it really describes it in a beautiful way. Proverbs 11, 2 verses. I want to talk about the generous this morning. And the writer of Proverbs says that the world of the generous, it gets larger and larger. How many of you want your world to get a little bigger, right? There's more people in it. It's growing. The world of the generous gets larger and larger. But the world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. The one who blesses others is abundantly blessed. Those who help others are helped. But look at verse 26. Curses on those who drive a hard bargain. Blessings on all those who play fair and square. All right, so this is a old verse, but this is describing perspectives. The generous person, it's the way that they see the world, and then the stingy person. And Solomon's saying that the person that is generous, that I'm going to say lives open-handed, their world gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it may not mean necessarily that their houses get bigger or their estate gets bigger, but I think they have more people in their lives. They touch more people, they help more people, the people around them grow. But then the stingy kind of live with the closed hands. And it says their world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Solomon also tells us in the book of Proverbs that as a man thinks in his heart, little different translation, so is he. And I've always believed that verse to mean my perspective on life, how I see the world, And everybody has a little bit different perspective. I think our upbringing shapes our perspective. Our formative years as kids, what we have been through shapes our perspective. Mom and dad, the people in our lives that we look up to shape our perspective. But our perspective is so important. The way that we view the people around us, the way that we view our lives and what God has placed in our lives. And one way I've heard it said is how I view things is how I do things. My perspective, your perspective. How I view things is how I do things. And so just to make it practical, if I view my job as terrible, and all the people that run companies in here know the employee that thinks their job is terrible, what do? A terrible job. How I view things is how I do things. And I've learned this, I've had jobs in my life I didn't like, but I tried to keep the mentality of this is the job that's going to lead to the job that I do like. And so it's not a terrible job. It's I don't want it, but I'm going to look at it as a good job. Thank God for it. But sometimes we can get this, I call it stinking thinking. And we start taking people for granted and things for granted, and we forget that every day is a gift. And I've noticed that the people who have a terrible perspective on life, they do terrible work. And the people that love what they do, that think what they do is awesome and great, man, they do great work. It's just how I view things. It's how I do things. It's there's a lot of ways to say it. But when we're talking about changing our world, we're talking about changing our world. This series is all about looking at life a little differently. And when I change the way I look at things in my life, the things in my life, the things I look at change. It starts there. It starts there. It starts on the inside, transforming our thinking, transforming our perspective. And I think that's the first place that God really begins to shift in our life. When we come to God, when we get saved, he kind of rewires us on the inside, gives us a new set of beliefs, a new way to see the world, that we don't really see people as obstacles anymore. We see people as opportunities, people that we can help, we can bless, that the world is, it's not going to hell in a handbasket, right? That there is a story that's being told. That when we read the Bible, life doesn't come at us like a math equation. It kind of comes at us like a story. And when we read this book, we know that this story has a beginning and an end. And it ends really good. Even though there's some tough parts in the middle and there's some stuff that's got to happen, but we know that God is going to redeem the world. He's going to redeem this earth. And so we, as Christians, I think we should have a really elevated perspective, a positive perspective. A perspective that nobody's unredeemable, that nobody's too far gone. And then even in our own lives, let's make this personable, that no relationship is too far lost, that God is in the miracle working business. And he can do all things, that he can work a miracle. I mean, he can make a way where there seems to be no way. Like, I want to keep a perspective of I want to see my world get better. And it's not because of self-effort, it's because of the gospel. Because I know that the gospel is good news for everyone. Even the planet was happy. It says the rocks cry out, that nature, it groans for its creator, that we have good news. You're a carrier of good news. And it's just hard sometimes to see the world like that. I mean, I'll just be honest. There's days where, it's hard to keep that perspective. But I want to share something with you. And I really feel like the Good Samaritan story captures, there's 4 perspectives. So there's this book called the Talmud. And so these rabbis came together, Jesus was a rabbi. So the Old Testament, the Torah, the first 4 books of the Bible, is a practicing Jews. That's what they use as their Bible, the first 4 books. And so some read Proverbs and Psalms. But the leading rabbis, a couple thousand years ago, put some commentary together of the first 4 books of the Bible. And they believe that every person has one of these 4 perspectives that I'm going to share with you this morning. One of these 4 perspectives. And I think if these 4 perspectives have the ability to change our lives. And they each get a little better and a little better. And so I want you to, as we go through these 4 perspectives, kind of see where maybe you are in these 4 perspectives. And in the story of the Good Samaritan, we see all 4 perspectives. Because if you don't know the story, we read it last week. I don't want to read it again, but there's a guy that gets robbed by some thieves, thrown in a ditch, left for dead. A priest comes by and doesn't even go on the side of the road that he's in the ditch. He's like, I got stuff to do. And then a Levite comes by and he walks up to the guy that's been beat up and sees him in the ditch, but keeps going. And then the Good Samaritan, right? The Good Samaritan stops, doesn't see this person as an obstacle, sees it as an opportunity to help, helps him out, incredible what this man does. But I want you to see these 4 perspectives. And the first, I think, perspective that we have, and not many people have this perspective. If you have this perspective, don't raise your hand. But what is yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. That was the perspective of the robber in the story of the Good Samaritan, right? We got to talk about the robber for a second. These robbers, these thieves, they see in this man, must have wanted something that he had, so they took it, beat him up, left him for dead, and threw him in a ditch. It's kind of the start of a good movie or something, right? Like it happens. Believe it or not, it happens. There are people in the world that have that mentality. If you brought them to church with you, don't look over. But there might be an organized crime. There's adults with this mentality that if they see it, if it's yours and they can take it, they believe it's theirs. I think the closest thing that I could find with this mentality would be a toddler, right? Anybody, if you've raised kids, you've had it. Okay, so maybe you have a toddler, and I found this a toddler's perspective about possessions. If I like it, it's mine. If I can take it from you, it's mine, right? If I had it a little while ago, it's mine. If I used to like it, it's mine. If it looks like it's mine, it's mine. If I'm having fun with it, it's mine. If you lay it down, it's mine. And my son added this one last week. If you're not using it, it's mine. He'll just go in and just decide to take stuff. But if it's broken, it's yours. But the reality is we all have a little robber in us. We all have a little robber in us. I'll never forget the first time I stole something. I was like 9 or 10 years old. And this is a formative memory. And you can all, and maybe you've never stolen anything in your life. But my mom gave me like 15 cents. This is how long ago this was. It's like this 2 decades ago, to go into the Tom Thumb in Milton and get gum. And then back in that day, you could get a stick of gum, like what was it called, wintergreen, and like for 10 cents. Yeah, Big Red. Yeah, Juicy Fruit. But then the Bubblicious. Y'all remember the Bubblicious? It was like a quarter. Yes. So it was, and so I had 15 cents, and I wasn't feeling the Big Red that day. And I wasn't feeling the Juicy Fruit, and I wasn't feeling the wintergreen. I really liked the Bubblicious gum. And so I remember walking down the candy aisle. I got 15 cents. I got 10 cent gum and then 25 cent gum. And I'm thinking, I got a decision to make here. And so, long story short, I took that Bubblicious gum. And I got back in the car, and I'm chewing on this Bubblicious gum, and my mom pulls out, and she mothers just have like, they just know. Like, I don't know how they know. Like, they got this instinct. Like, I don't know if she just smelled the Bubblicious gum or somehow put it together that I gave him 15 cents and he comes out with a 25 cent pack of gum, but she knew. And she asked me, and I stayed silent. She flipped that truck around, drove back to the Tom Thumb. I had to go in and I had to apologize to everybody in the store. Both the clerks, the person stocking drinks in the back, that she pulled them out of the cooler. I apologized to them, she made it memorable that was bad, and you're not supposed to do it. That if you want something, you work for it. But robbers don't have that mentality. They don't have that mentality. These thieves didn't have that mentality, and so I know. Look at your neighbor and say, "I know that's not you." That's not you. I know that's not you. So we're going to move on. That's not you. Maybe in an old life, right? But that's not you. You don't steal. We don't do that. The second perspective, which I would say the Levite and the priest had this perspective, is what's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it. Right? I earned this. It's my time. I'm on my schedule. And I don't know what the priest and the Levite had going on that day, but I don't know many people who would walk past someone bleeding and dying on the side of the road. I don't know many. You must be really important. But the priest and the Levite, I think it was a perspective that they didn't have the time. Or maybe they did, they just weren't going to share it. They weren't going to share the resources. And so I think when it comes to our possessions, our time, our talent, and our treasure, sometimes it's easy to default to selfishness, or to believe that this is mine. I earned it. This is my time. This is I earned this stuff. I earned these resources, and the person with that mentality, that's how they live. And I would say that's the stingy person in our first verse. This is the closed fist person. This is the person that doesn't like to share. This is the person that thinks that they want to keep everything to themselves. And I heard a story about a husband and wife, and a man did really well, and he had started a company, and it was very successful. And he was in his later part of life, And he went to the doctor, and he got a really bad diagnosis, and the doctor said, you need to, you need to start making arrangements and settle everything. You don't have much time to live. And so this man who had built this company from the ground up said, well, I want to take everything with me. I built this company. I want to keep the money. I want to be buried with all of my stuff. And the doctor was like, are you sure you really want to do that? I was like, yep. And so he went home and told his wife, and then his wife just went in and shot him. And then, no, just kidding. No, I'm kidding. I threw that in there. But the wife was shocked, okay? The wife was upset. Yeah, I don't know how that conversation went, but it was not good. And so, I mean, she of course, that would cause a fight. And so the man dies, and at the funeral, the wife comes up at the graveside, and there's a little box, and she places it inside of the grave. And she said, his last wishes was to be buried with all of his money. And so I wrote a check, and it's in this box. And if he can cash it, he can have it. So, but that's not a good way to live, is it? That's not a healthy way to live. I don't think that's the way God's called us to live. And when we live with that mentality that what's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it, our world just gets smaller. We may have more stuff. Right? We may have more resources, we may have more things, but the people in our life, we close people out. And I love this verse, and I think it's fitting here. Matthew 16, verse 25, Jesus said this, if anybody wants to gain their life, they'll lose it. And whoever loses their life for me will find it. And I call that kingdom calculus because it doesn't make any sense. Kingdom calculus, that somehow in life, when we live with an open hand and we're willing to give of our time and willing to give of our resources, it's my son has this boomerang that we were throwing in the yard a couple of weeks ago. And have you ever seen one of these boomerangs? It's like when you throw it, I think they're made in Australia. They like circle back and they come all the way back to you. And the way that I see the things and the time, the talent, the treasure that God has given us, when we're willing to share that, it always comes back. Always. That when we live with open hands, it comes back somehow good measure, pressed down, that we can't outgive God. Now here's the third one. The third one. Again, I didn't write these, so these are coming from a rabbi, and I think this is a good way to live. Look at your neighbor and say, this is the mentality. This is a good mentality. This is a good perspective. This is a good perspective. What is mine is yours, and I'm going to give it. That was the mentality of the Good Samaritan. That what's mine is yours. He got off of his, he was riding some kind of animal. He got off of it. He bound up this man in the ditch. He put him in a hotel, said, hey, I'm going to come back and take care of his balance. What is mine is yours, and I'm going to give it. And what I love about this Good Samaritan is he had an outside perspective. He's seen the world around him. When he walked, the priest and the Levite, I think, when they walked up and seen the man in the ditch, they asked, what's going to happen to me in my schedule if I stop? It was totally about what they had going on that day, clearly. This is going to interfere. I've got to get to the synagogue or whatever they had. But the Samaritan stopped and asked this question, what is going to happen to this man if I don't stop? And so he wasn't just internally focused on what he had going on, but he's seen the world around him. And he didn't do everything for this man, but what he did do changed his life. He was willing to share. And it's amazing, I feel like, that what happens in our life when we begin to be generous. I'm not talking about just with giving. I'm talking about with our time, with our talent, what God has gifted you with, that when we're willing to open up and give back, it's like it creates this funnel in our life where God just continues to give more and more and more. And I can tell you, I can't, it's hard to pick the stories. It's hard for me to just tell one of how God has, in an area of my life where I've been open-handed, how he's just brought it back in the life of our church. It's been incredible. It's like, it's amazing. It doesn't matter how big the check is that we write to missions, it will come back. a lot of times twice as much or 10x when we live with an open hand. Even when we take on things that we're like, all right, I don't know if we have the time to take on this initiative, but we do it, somehow God just grows what we have left. And it's incredible how God just does that for us. And I think it all starts with a perspective. And here's the fourth one, and this is, look at your neighbor and say, this is what we want right here. Okay? Because what is mine is not mine. I'm gonna give it. What's mine is yours. I'm gonna give it. That is a good one. But I think this is really where we want to be. What is mine is not mine, and I'm gonna steward it. Now think about that for a second. What is mine is not mine. Psalm 24 says it like this: the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world, and all those who dwell in it. And I love that perspective. I love it because, life can get overwhelming sometimes. When you feel like you're the CEO and all this stuff you have going on, and you've got people that you're responsible for, you've got, everybody in here, you've got responsibilities in your life. And the weight of the world sometimes, I don't think the human frame was ever meant to carry it. And when we live with this perspective, that what's my life, my time, all the money, all the people, the talents that I have, when I live with this mentality that it's not mine, it really takes the heavy lifting off of me. And rather, none of this, every day is a gift. The last breath I had was a gift. The ability to do what I do, the ability for you to do what you do, whatever it may be, if it's raise children, if it's run a company, if it's to work at Chick-fil-A, I don't know. If it's to whatever it is, when I keep this mentality that I just want to be good at what God has gifted me, I want to steward well what God has given me. And I want to use the time well that God has allowed me to have. It's no longer my stuff. It's no longer my time. It's no longer my money. It's no longer my gift or talent. It's Lord. And I think what happens is it begins to facilitate this relationship with God. Because I don't want to just give away things that are God's. I want to manage it. I want to steward it. I want to invest my time well. I want to invest these resources well because I know they're not mine. And one day I'll give an account for what I've done with the time and the stuff that God has given me. And so what's mine is not mine, and I want to steward it well. And the key to changing your world is to not get on a plane or go to, on a mission trip or to get more resources or to get more time or more time. The key to changing your world is to stewarding what's already in it well. It's to do an inventory. Y'all know I worked at Pepsi for a little while. I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm out of stories, but every week, it was somebody's job every day to do inventory. This guy he would go around and count everything in the warehouse, and then once a week we would rip the place apart and count everything. And I think a good steward, the key is they know what's in their life, the people, the resources, the time, and a good man. I want to read this to you. What a steward does. This is what a steward does: manages assets for the owner's benefit. He carries no sense of entitlement to the assets that he or she manages. It's his job to find out what the owner wants done and then to carry out his will. Isn't that amazing? So I'm a steward. God, I want to steward well what you've given me. And I recognize that everything is from you. A good steward recognizes that everything is from God. It's all a gift. And this is what I want you to do, just in this moment. Just bow your head and close your eyes. And I want us to go to the Lord and just, and a lot of, maybe you've been trying to run your life on your own. And that can get really confusing, and that can get really difficult, and that can cause a lot of anxiety, and that can cause a lot of stress and a lot of sleepless nights, trying to be in the driver's seat. And maybe there's just some things in your life that in this moment the Holy Spirit wants to remind you that you're stewarding it. And sometimes the best thing that we can do is just give it to God. We're just giving back to him what's already his. It could be a person. It could be a person. It could be a relationship that's very important that we've been trying really hard to fix. So many things in life that can be weighty, but there's something freeing when we release it and give it to God and say, Lord, this is yours. My life is yours. The people in my life, they're yours. Everything that you've given me, every resource, every gift. And sometimes the greatest worship that we can give God is just giving him our life back and stop trying to run it on our own and be the CEO and say, no, I'm not the CEO, Lord. Lord, you tell me what you want me to do with what you've given me. And that's what I want to do. And so, Lord, even in this moment right now, we just ask for the Holy Spirit to speak to us. That, God, that you speak to us through your word. Lord, if there's anyone in here that's been burdened, trying to maybe run their life, and when you're saying, no, I want you to just surrender it. I just believe, God, that you're speaking to us all the time. And so I just pray in this moment, God, that you would speak to us today. Help us, Lord, to be good stewards. Help us not to take for granted things in our life, to just every morning wake up and to be grateful for the people that we're around, for the house that we're in, for the car that we drive, for the shoes on our feet, the clothes that we wear. Lord, help us to stay in that vein of great gratitude. We just thank you so much. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said amen.